Hello everyone, I'm Jacob Kaufman, I'm the nerd on the street, and today we're talking about web browsers. Okay everyone, this is a video that I've been meaning to make for a couple of years now, and I just never seem to get around to it. And it's fitting in a way, because web browsers are one of the most used applications that we have. But how often do you actually think about which web browser you're using? You probably have one installed on your computer. It might be the one that came with your operating system, or it might be one that you added on after the fact. And you probably open that web browser up and use it almost every single day without actually considering if you should switch to another one. Now obviously, similarly to Linux distros, we all have work to get done, and it's good to sort of settle on something eventually and not think about it too much. But at the same time, it is good every now and then to step back and take a look at the experience you're having with your computer and consider, is this experience the best that it could be? Is the web browser that I'm using right now the correct choice for my needs? Now, there are two main web browser engines in existence in the world right now. The first one is used by Google Chrome and its open source counterpart Chromium, and it's called Blink. And the other one is used exclusively by Mozilla Firefox. It's called Gecko. Now, most web browsers out there today are actually using Blink under the hood. A lot of them are actually using Chromium's entire code base under the hood. Because Opera back in the day, the Opera web browser had its own rendering engine called Presto. They discontinued that back in 2013. They switched to WebKit, which Chrome was using at the time, and they're using Blink today. Back in the day, Internet Explorer used to use its own browser engine called Trident. Microsoft replaced Trident with its own Edge HTML engine when it first created Microsoft Edge, but then it later dropped that engine and switched Edge to Blink. So the situation we have now is that every user of Windows and of Android, by default, is using Blink. Now, the big exception when it comes to what's included in operating systems is Apple. Apple is amazingly still using the WebKit browser engine in Safari, and WebKit was originally a fork of KHTML from the KDE project, actually. It's ironic now because the KDE framework has switched away from WebKit, and they're basically using Chromium code. They're using Blink now behind the scenes on KDE. So Apple is really alone in continuing to maintain WebKit now. But Apple doesn't even publish Safari builds for Windows anymore. They never published them for Linux. So unless you're in the Apple ecosystem, WebKit and Safari, it's not really an option for you. Now, you might be wondering why it's a bad thing that all browsers would be using Blink. In fact, maybe it would be a good thing that all browsers use the same engine, because that means compatibility on websites is going to be pretty standard across different browsers. The problem is the key word in there is standard. When all browsers use the same engine, and that engine is developed by an entity, which is Chromium, Google, that means that Google basically gets to decide what web standards get implemented in all of the web browsers and which ones don't. So even though there are open regulatory bodies for the internet who come up with proposals and publish what they think should be browser specifications, in effect, browser specifications don't really mean anything unless Google decides to adopt them in Blink. Likewise, if Google comes up with a new proprietary feature and puts it in Blink, websites are probably going to start using it eventually because almost every web browser is going to support that feature, but it won't work in those few web browsers not using Blink. In addition to that consideration, there's also the fact that Google is an advertising company. They provide a lot of free services, and they make most of their money off of ad revenue. So even though Google is pretty good at security, they do not have the best reputation for privacy. Their entire business model revolves around collecting your data. And so if you're using a web browser that's using the Blink engine underneath, especially if you're using one closely connected to Google like Chromium or Google Chrome, Google is incentivized to collect as much data as they can directly from you through the browser. They are also incentivized to make sure that websites are able to track you when they're using Google's ad platform. In recent years, we've heard stories, and so far it seems like they've mostly been scare stories that hasn't actually come to fruition yet, but we have seen news stories suggesting that Google is on its way to banning advertisement blockers, ad blockers, from web browsers by basically breaking compatibility with them in the Blink engine. You know, the browser engine is what's actually rendering the content on screen, and so if Google says they're not going to allow extensions to hook into that display mechanism anymore, then ad blockers might just not work anymore on any of those browsers using Blink under the hood. That's Chrome, Edge, Opera, Vivaldi, a lot of browsers. So in order to combat that monopoly effect that Google currently has over web standards, some people go out of their way to use a different web browser that does not use Blink under the hood. As I mentioned earlier, basically the only modern option, the only option that's still being actively developed, is Mozilla Firefox with Gecko. So that might leave you thinking, well, why don't I just use Firefox if this is an issue at all? Firefox is a pretty decent web browser. I've used it myself in the past. However, Mozilla as an entity is actually a little bit controversial if you peek under the hood. For one thing, in recent years, Mozilla has made monetary donations to political groups that might be considered radical, depending on who you ask. And for another thing, Mozilla seems intent on shoving a lot of features into their web browser other than web browsing. I work with a lot of computers in my day-to-day life, my day-to-day work, and Firefox is usually installed on most of those computers by default, so I end up opening it up a lot. Some people would say that things started to get bad when Mozilla acquired Pocket a few years back. Pocket is a proprietary extension. Mozilla's running the servers on their end, and in addition to basically duplicating bookmark functionality, Pocket also recommends news articles for you that it shoves into your face through the new tab page on every new Firefox install. In addition, Firefox often pops up messages every single time you update. It asks if you want to change your theme. It uses really creepy wording when it's talking about the theme to make it seem like you're making an ideological statement when you change the colors of your web browser. And you'll get toolbars in Firefox from time to time, either asking you to submit feedback via surveys, or even just letting you know that Firefox is tracking you and sending your data to Mozilla by default because telemetry is opt-out. So in my opinion, Firefox has a lot of little annoyances here and there. To qualify that, for one thing, depending on what Linux distribution you use, you might or might not be exposed to some of those quirks. For example, Pop! OS is the only distribution I'm aware of that disables those Pocket-recommended news articles on the new tab page by default. Some other distros, like Linux Mint, used to disable telemetry by default, although Mozilla eventually pressured them into shipping their upstream default settings, or at least convinced them to do that as part of a larger negotiation. We also saw that when Canonical switched their Ubuntu package from a Debian format to a Snap format. That was actually Mozilla's idea, not Canonical's. A big part of Mozilla's rationale for that was because they wanted users to get Firefox quote-unquote straight from the source without any extra patches or default settings changes being applied. And of course, everybody's aware of when Debian used to have to rebrand Firefox into Iceweasel in order to apply security patches without violating Mozilla's trademark policies. That effort goes to show that even though Mozilla doesn't want distros to change default settings, distros can still exert some level of influence over the Firefox experience. The Mozilla bloat in Firefox is probably worst on Windows, which is kind of funny, in addition to macOS, since you don't have the package curated by any third party before it gets to you on those operating systems. But even on those platforms, lots of people will tell you, well, it's not that bad. You can just go into the settings, you can disable telemetry, you can disable surveys, you can X out of the theme switcher every time it pops up, you can choose not to use Pocket, you can drag it out of your toolbar, you can turn off the recommended articles on the new tab page, and then if you want an ad blocker, you can go and search for that on the web and install it, and you can do those 6 or more things every single time you set up a new computer with Firefox. It's not that bad. Do you not like having a checklist of things you need to do every time you set up a new computer with Firefox? That's what some people say. Personally, for me, it gets a little grating. I acknowledge that Firefox is open source and that a lot of Firefox's annoyances can be toned down through the settings. However, I just got tired eventually of having more and more cruft shoved into my face by Mozilla. Eventually I said, you know what, enough is enough. All this ideological stuff about using a different browser engine is great, but I also want a browser that actually works well and is a nice experience to use. Well, if you're on the same page as me, I have good news for you, because today I'm going to show you 2 web browsers. One of them is actually based on Firefox, so even if you care strongly about that browser engine diversity thing, one of the browsers I'm going to show you is based on Firefox. It's called LibreWolf, and it basically takes Firefox and it just strips out all of the Mozilla stuff. You might have heard of a project called Ungoogled Chromium. It's basically a build of Google's Chromium browser, the open source version, and it tries to remove as much of the Google services and Google tracking stuff as possible. LibreWolf is similar to that, and it's just doing the same thing for Firefox, and it's removing, like I said, all of the Mozilla-tied services and tracking and features. It actually does still have optional syncing, which I'll show you, but that is the first browser I'm going to demonstrate here. The second one I'm going to show is called the Brave browser. It's actually a little bit older than LibreWolf, and it is based on Chromium, so you will be using Blink if you're using Brave. Depending on who you are, that might be a bad thing. It might also be a good thing if you want the best possible browser compatibility with all the different websites out there that might be targeting Chrome. Now, Brave is a little bit less neutral neutral. It goes out of its way to remove as much website tracking stuff as possible. It goes farther than LibreWolf by default. Both of these web browsers have ad blockers built in. LibreWolf is basically the simple option, the neutral option, for if you really want to keep content and browser separated. Brave is the more feature-filled, exciting option if you're somebody who gets excited about using web browsers. So that's what we're talking about today, maybe a little bit of a long intro, but I wanted to address those things and point out some of the major reasons why, if you haven't considered switching your web browser, you might want to consider it while I show you these two today. So keep that in mind, and with that, we'll cut to the desktop. And here we are on the desktop. The first browser we're going to take a look at, like I said, is LibreWolf. And before I open this up, I want to let you guys know that I have completely removed all of the configuration and cache folders for both LibreWolf and Brave before I started recording. So what you're about to see is what you will see if you install this browser and open it up for the very first time. So I'll click on LibreWolf here, and it's going to launch to our new tab page. And that is it. That's all that happens when you launch LibreWolf for the very first time. Compare this to Firefox, where you open it up, you get 3 different tabs. You've got your new tab page, a welcome page, Mozilla's privacy policy page, and you've got pop-ups on your new tab page asking if you want to set up sync. You've got news stories that start loading from Pocket. All of this different stuff that you see when you launch Firefox. In LibreWolf, that was the first launch, and then here's our second launch. And once again, you have no toolbars asking if you want to review your privacy settings because they're all pretty much set optimally to begin with. And you have nothing being pushed at you here on the new tab page. The only thing we have is a DuckDuckGo search bar. So like I said, if you want a web browser that really has no extra bells and whistles other than letting you browse the web, LibreWolf is the way to go. We can customize the new tab page a little bit here. You can turn on shortcuts so you can pin websites that you use often manually. You can also turn on recent activity so that you'll see recent pages that you visited. Those are both off by default. I personally do like having those on. And customizing the rest of the web browser is going to be the exact same as Firefox. You can hit Control-Shift-B to hide or show your bookmarks toolbar there. Personally, I'm not a fan of having this centered URL bar. I want it to go all the way across. So to make that happen, I can right-click here, I can click Customize Toolbar, and I'll just drag those spaces right out of the toolbar and click Done. And the one other thing I want to draw attention to before I navigate to a website is uBlock Origin, which is pre-installed here in LibreWolf. This is pretty much the only thing that is not vanilla Firefox that LibreWolf actually adds rather than removing, is they have installed uBlock Origin by default. This is my preferred ad blocker when I'm using a web browser that does not have one built in. It has been my preferred ad blocker for years, and it's been many people's preferred ad blocker. It's open source, it's quick, it's efficient, and it's largely replaced other extensions like the older AdBlock Plus extension and the pre-fork uBlock extension after those both started allowing some ads. So this is one extension that I think everybody really should have installed anyway. It's the kind of thing I haven't installed on my parents' computers, just because it's such a quality of life improvement not having ads everywhere on the internet. It's not just something for power users, it's something that really makes sense to include by default, in my opinion. I do like to have that shown on the actual toolbar, so I'm just going to pin it to the toolbar here. It shows up and it shows you how many elements are blocked on a page, which can be useful. In case the ad blocker breaks a web page, you can look up there and see if the number is non-zero, then one of the troubleshooting steps would be turning it off. But once again, this is default LibreWolf. So I'm going to go ahead and go to nerdonthestreet.com to start with, just to show you this navigating to a web page. I will go ahead and hide my bookmarks toolbar there. And by default, the bookmarks toolbar only shows up on your new tab page. I think I forced it to show up on all web pages when I turned it off and on the first time. So as you can see here, this is my website, and it is displaying as expected. Now there's an advertisement section in the sidebar here. I normally have a Google ad on the sidebar of my website, which only brings in a few bucks a month, but hey, it helps pay for the hosting costs. Now, one way to hide that advertisement is if people join the Nerd Club here on my website. If you subscribe to that, then when you log in, this ad will not be sent from the server side. However, if you're not a Nerd Club member, you still won't see an advertisement if you're using LibreWolf, at least not by default. If we go up here, you can see there are 2 items that were blocked on this page by uBlock Origin. And if we want to see what the website looks like without doing that, I can turn that off and reload. Now in this case, the ad is actually still blocked because of enhanced tracking protection, which is a native Firefox feature. I can turn that one off as well. And now we see an advertisement. So there are kind of 2 different layers here blocking ads. I'm going to turn both of those back on, but that was just to show you, my website's pretty reasonable. It's really just one ad in the sidebar, and I think one maybe at the bottom of certain pages, and that's about it for me. But there are other websites out there that have a lot more ads, and having an ad blocker can really clean them up, so it's great that that's there by default. I'm going to click on a recent video here, and it's not going to start playing automatically because LibreWolf, just like regular Firefox, it blocks auto-playing videos by default. So in order to allow my website to work properly, I'm going to go ahead and allow audio and video. Since this is a video website, I'll hit refresh there, and this time when the page loads, it is going to start playing. Going to go ahead and mute that. But we do have a video playing now, so you can see media works perfectly fine. This is a regular old HLS stream. I can also select a quality here, and it's going to load an MP4 file, which also plays perfectly normally. So everything's about as you'd expect it there. Now I'm going to open a new tab here, and next I'm going to show you a web search. I'll go ahead and unmaximize this window, and I'll just search for my own channel or company name here, Nerd on the Street. Now, as I'm typing, notice that we are getting some suggestions from our browser history, but we are not getting any search suggestions from our search providers. Some web browsers like Chrome and Edge are going to send everything that you type in the URL bar to your search provider so that they can send back suggestions on what you might want to search for. LibreWolf has that disabled by default. Now, the default search provider is DuckDuckGo. There are a number of other providers installed by default. You can see we have two different DuckDuckGo icons. One is for the main DuckDuckGo search engine. The other one is for DuckDuckGo Lite. And there's also a few more. We have StartPage pre-installed, and StartPage is a Google proxy search engine that I've enjoyed using a lot in the past. And of course, you can install your own search engines as well. But I'm going to go ahead and hit enter to search with DuckDuckGo by default. And DuckDuckGo is pretty good at its search results. Almost everything on this front page has to do with me. Looks like we've got one at the bottom that's not related to Nerd on the Street. And you might notice here that DuckDuckGo has searched with a white background. This is its light theme. You can change that right here in the DuckDuckGo settings manually, but the reason it defaulted to the light theme rather than a dark theme to match my OS is because if we go over here into a new tab and we open up our browser settings, we can scroll down to the website appearance section, and you can see that LibreWolf enables a feature called resist fingerprinting by default, which disables the automatic light or dark theme selection on websites because websites can potentially track you or at least narrow down who you are based on whether your browser requested a light theme or a dark theme. Now, LibreWolf does a pretty good job at adding links to their documentation that explains what these features are and why they're enabled. Features being disabled or broken in Firefox was kind of an issue with LibreWolf earlier on, but they have gotten better about adding tooltips like this to explain what's going on. Now, most of the settings in this settings page are going to be the same ones you get with vanilla Firefox, but LibreWolf adds a section of the settings here called LibreWolf. And this basically shows you everything that LibreWolf is doing that's not default behavior or standard behavior for Firefox. For example, here, DuckDuckGo might be forced onto a light theme now that I've actually clicked that button, but I'm just going to go to google.com and show you that that is also on a light theme by default. If I go back over here and uncheck this resist fingerprinting option, then I can go back to general. We can see that the light or dark theme is set to automatic by default. So if I refresh Google, maybe I do a Control-Shift refresh, there we go. Google's going to default to a dark theme. If I go back over to DuckDuckGo, looks like it did pick that automatic theme up as well. So if you find that there are any convenience features that you want to work that aren't working by default in LibreWolf, it is very easy to go in and tweak based on how much you care about privacy or how much you care about those convenience features. Now, one other really cool thing about this LibreWolf settings page is that we can actually click these question mark icons and it will show you the underlying Firefox config options that those are actually toggling. These options are going to correspond to, if you go to the About config section. This is a feature in vanilla Firefox that allows you to set a lot more manual options than you get in the regular settings. In this case, we can see that enable resist fingerprinting is going to turn on the privacy.resist fingerprinting setting. So I can search for that over here, privacy.resist fingerprinting, and it is set to true when that is checked. When we uncheck that, it's going to be set to false. So if you're wanting to see exactly what LibreWolf is doing under the hood in Firefox, a lot of these things, they're not actually patching the code, but they're giving you default settings, and you can see what those settings are so that you can go and turn them on a vanilla Firefox instance if you wanted to, for example. Now I want to show you down here, there's an option to enable Google Safe Browsing. They have that disabled by default. We can click on the question mark icon there, and it actually sort of explains when you might want to enable this option and why it's disabled by default. Now, as you can see, this feature actually downloads a database and does all of the checking locally. It does not actually send your current browsing to Google. So this setting is not a privacy concern. They have it disabled for censorship reasons because this feature, this database, basically lets Google decide what websites everybody's web browsers are going to block by default. But if you did want to turn this on, you can check that option. And I wanted to show you once again, this is basically one setting that you're turning off or on in LibreWolf. But if you were in vanilla Firefox, in this case, it would not just be a single config option that you're manually setting, it would be 7 different options. So having a single checkbox that turns all of those on and off at the same time is really a huge time saver, even when it comes to manually configuring things. So those are the LibreWolf preferences, and the one other thing I want to show you is how to set custom rules in this ad blocker. I'll show you why you might want to do this. If we go to a Twitter page, for example, I don't use Twitter often and I don't recommend that you would, but we can go to twitter.com/knots_network as an example here, and we can take a look at the tweets on the Nerd on the Street account. I'll X out of this sign in with Google box that Twitter pops up there. Now, as I start to scroll down and read some of the tweets, we see this what's happening box in the sidebar of Twitter. And another pop-up, thank you, Twitter. Now, personally, these recommendations from Twitter, they are extremely rarely anything that I actually want to be thinking about or looking at. You know, in this case, we've just got, it looks like a sports item, a couple of sports items. We've got 1, maybe 2 entertainment items, and then possibly a political item down here. But when you're just trying to check out tweets from somebody specific, you're going here to read Nerd on the Street's tweets, for example. You know, this is a distraction. This is almost worse than advertisements because it's pushing things in your face. It's saying, hey, look at this happening. Look at that happening. One of these can catch your eye and it can very easily suck you down a hole of wasting your time reading about things that you did not intend to look up at all when you logged onto your computer today. So what I've started doing is I've started writing ad block rules that block this kind of element from web pages. Now, how this is going to work, I'm just going to open up the uBlock Origin menu and I'm going to click on these 3 gears to open up the dashboard. From there, I'm going to go to the My Filters page. And here you can actually type in your own ad blocking filters to decide what this extension is going to block. These filters use a syntax called EasyList. It's the same syntax that the original AdBlock Plus extension used. So just to show you here, this is my current filter list that I use. I've got a text file here called AdBlock Rules, and I actually keep this on a Nextcloud instance so I can sign into it from a new web browser and apply it very easily without having to leave the browser at all. But I can copy all of that text and I'm just going to paste it all in here. Now I could make a different video about how to actually write these rules. In fact, that's probably a good idea for me to do that one day. But it's pretty easy to make these rules, and there are even automated ways to do it. If I go back to my own website, let's say that these thumbnails here are actually not content. Let's say hypothetically that those are images you don't want to see. Here in LibreWolf, you can right-click on an image and click Block Element, and this is a feature of uBlock Origin. It's going to pre-populate a rule that will block this specific element, and it's also going to give you some suggestions for other ways you could do the same thing. So I want to set up a cosmetic filter to block any elements with the class of browse thumb. I'm going to click on that, and I am going to make this a little bit less specific. I think I might be able to do that just by, sliding this slider backwards a little bit. So we see highlighted in red all of the elements that are about to be blocked, and then I can click Create, and that's going to create a uBlock Origin rule that blocks all of those images, so those are not going to show anymore. If we go back over here to our filters, you can see we now have a new item below where I pasted before. It's just time-stamped with the website, and this is a uBlock rule to block the thumbnails on my website. If you ever want to undo that, we can just take those away, apply changes, and if I refresh over here, the images are back. So you don't necessarily need to know how to program these yourself if you are able to use those GUI tools that I just showed you. But I've got a collection here and it is growing. And the first thing in the list here is hiding the what's happening sidebar on twitter.com. The syntax for this one is a little bit more involved just because of how this is coded on Twitter's website. But I can go ahead and refresh this page now, and you'll see after it loads, there is no more what's happening box. This is the bottom of the sidebar here. So this is really a huge game changer. You can see other things that I'm also blocking, auto-playing videos on fandom wikis, recommended posts underneath Imgur albums, the doodles and the recommended headlines that Google puts on their homepage all the time. You might think that in order to use some of these websites like Google, you need to accept taking all of the propaganda that they put in front of your eyes, or else you need to just not use it and find alternatives like DuckDuckGo info or start page. But it is possible to block a lot of the stuff that websites kind of promote, even when it's coming from the website itself, even when it's something first party, like the What's Happening box on Twitter. So if those things bother you, I would encourage you to take just a few minutes to set something like this up, and it can really make you feel a lot more comfortable and less stressed out when you sit down to go onto the internet. So yeah, that's just about the last thing I wanted to show you here in LibreWolf. If we go up to the top right here, there is a drop-down box where we can search through our tabs and see a list of the open tabs and all of your different windows there. But aside from that, LibreWolf is really just Firefox, with all of the stuff you don't care about ripped out. You know, somebody looking at this new tab page is not going to say, oh, something's missing. There are no recommended news articles from Mozilla. This is just a web browser, and it's a really good one. So if you want to grab LibreWolf, you can go to LibreWolf.net. They have a very clean homepage here, cleaner than the Firefox homepage. If we go and look up Firefox's homepage here, let's take a look at what that looks like on Mozilla's website real quick. So we've got an ad at the top right that just animated in for Mozilla's VPN that they're selling. We have 2 items that are blocked by default by the ad blocker on Firefox's homepage. As we scroll down, we get a pop-up that's talking about unrelated products in their quote-unquote family, aside from the browser that you were actually trying to download here. And you've got a whole lot of copy, a whole lot of sort of advertisement for Firefox. It's not all bad, but it is quite a lot. And then at the bottom, we've got some ideological stuff, you know, challenging the status quo. Some pretty bold statements that Mozilla likes to throw out just to try and stand out in a world where they're getting smoked by Google. But yeah, the LibreWolf website is really much more straight and to the point. It tells you exactly what they have on top of regular old Firefox, and it is a little bit less corporate and more community oriented. They've got a list of some of their core contributors here right on the homepage. So the blue installation button will take you to this documentation page. They've got downloads for Windows. You can install it or you can run it portably. They've got info about macOS here. It's just a regular old DMG. And on Linux, they have excellent support for a range of distributions. I'm showing you this demo on Fedora right now, and they actually have a Fedora repository that serves native RPMs. They also show you information about an unofficial Copper repository, just in case you want an alternative source. They have first-class support for Debian, Ubuntu, and Linux Mint. Over on Arch, they are in the AUR. And if we go to other Linux, this is just great. They have an app image, and they're on FlatHub, so you can install that as a Flatpak or an app image. These are both universal package formats, so most projects can get away with just picking one of these or the other, but they provide both here. So it is very, very easy to run LibreWolf on any OS that you want to. And finally, since this is a fork of Firefox, it is open source. We can click on this source code button right here on their homepage to get to their GitLab organization. And if you've ever browsed the Mozilla Firefox source code online, or if you've contributed to their bug tracker, Mozilla uses sort of a custom interface. It is open source. Vanilla Firefox is completely open source, but their website is a little antiquated and a little difficult to use. LibreWolf being on GitLab here is very easy to look at and very easy to contribute to. If we click on the browser section here, we have basically all of the tools they use to build LibreWolf. And once again, this is more like a patch set than a full-on fork. If we take a look at the Linux repository here, you can see we don't have the entire Firefox source code. It's more like we just have a set of patches. And once again, if we come down here to source, this is where you can find all of the patches and changes that LibreWolf makes to the upstream Mozilla Firefox source code. So you can keep up with development there. There's sort of a chart of how they work here in the README file of this repo. And if we go up to the top and we select the releases, we can actually look and see that we are currently based on Firefox 1.14.0.1. If I go here and check out the package that I currently have from the Fedora repository underneath Help and About LibreWolf, that is 1.14.0.1. And the -2 just means this is the second release they've made based off of the 1.14.0.1 Firefox release. But that's the version of LibreWolf we're currently on. And if I go to getfirefox.com and I take a look at that homepage again, I'll click download here. To download Firefox, they give you a pop-up when you try to download. The highlighted suggested button goes to some accounts page, and to actually download Firefox, you have to click on the non-recommended button. It's like Mozilla doesn't even want you to use Firefox. But if we do go there and we start downloading here, we see that the current version that Mozilla has released is 1.14.0.1. So LibreWolf is on the latest patch set of Firefox. Firefox forks kind of have a bad reputation of getting out of date. With older Firefox spin-offs such as Pale Moon, you sometimes had versions of the downstream app that were based on much older versions of Firefox, which is bad for security and usability. I just wanted to show you that so that you know you're not really compromising on Firefox updates when you're using LibreWolf. The 1.14.0.1 release, they got that released 2 days ago on June 9th. UTC. And if we take a look at the Firefox release notes here, 1.14.0.1 was released on June 9th. This was not a one-off coincidence. LibreWolf typically has an update out within the same day that Mozilla puts it out. They just apply their patch set on top. If needed, they go back later and make a second release if there's any improvements they can add. But once again, it is very, very up to date, so that is absolutely great as well. Next, I'm going to switch to another virtual desktop, and the rest of the video is going to be talking about the Brave browser. Now, I'm going to open this up, and you're immediately going to see some differences between Brave and LibreWolf. As you can see, the first thing we get is a big old welcome screen asking if we want to set this as the default browser. I'm going to skip that. It asks if we want to import settings. I'll skip that. And then we have some diagnostic options that you can either turn on or uncheck here. Firefox has some of that enabled by default, and it just pops up a web page or a toolbar letting you know you can change it in the settings menu. So it's nice that Brave at least gives you the option right here off the bat to disable them as part of the first time setup wizard. However, unlike LibreWolf, there is a first time setup wizard. I'm going to click finish just to get through that. Now, the Brave web browser is much more like mainstream browsers in how it behaves. My whole thing with LibreWolf, the reason I like it so much is because it really cuts out all of the cruft and it leaves only what you actually want in a web browser by default. The Brave browser admittedly has a lot of similarities with Google Chrome and Mozilla Firefox and Microsoft Edge, and that it's got a lot of extra features that are kind of enabled by default. And yes, just like Firefox or Chrome or Edge, you can go and turn off all of those settings one by one, and I'm about to go and do that now. But I did want to acknowledge that Brave is not perfect when it comes to UI and UX. They absolutely do have a lot of little extras that you might or might not get any use out of. Now, the reason I'm talking about Brave today, even though it's got a lot of those extra things that I was kind of complaining about earlier, is that it's still a niche web browser compared to Firefox and Chrome. You know, there are still many people out there who have not heard of the Brave browser, and Brave is philosophically different under the hood. If you take a look at the organization that runs it, it's a little bit more controversial than the mainstream options in some ways, but it is very unique. Brave is kind of built to present an alternative to quote-unquote big tech, and the company behind Brave is a competitor to Google. They're a competitor to the big advertising companies on the internet. So while there are options out there like ungoogled Chromium that just take Google Chrome and strip out a bunch of the Google stuff, with Brave you can be very confident that anything that Google would care about in terms of data harvesting has been removed from this browser because the Brave company's entire business model relies on getting that right and stripping those things out. I actually recall an issue where some of Brave's changes caused Google reCAPTCHA to start prompting users more often than usual because Google wasn't able to fingerprint and keep track of their machines. So while inconveniences like that obviously aren't desirable, and Brave did fix that issue, I think it's a good sign if their privacy work accidentally starts breaking Google services that rely on tracking. I also wanted to talk about Brave because I wanted to draw attention to the fact that even if you don't like any of these extra features that they add, you can turn a lot of it off and you can still use it as a really great Chromium-based web browser if you need a Chromium-based web browser. You know, some websites out there are just built for Chrome. They might not work very well in Firefox, which is a problem with the website, but you as a user might still need to deal with that website. So Brave is a valid option for doing that. So to kick things off here, this is a pretty cluttered new tab page we get by default. I'm going to go down here and click Customize. This is going to open up a dialog box here where we can customize the Brave dashboard. Personally, I like to turn off the background images. If you're coming from a web browser like Microsoft Edge that gives you Bing images in the background, you know, sort of a new landscape image every day, it can be nice to have depending on what you use the computer for and things like that. Personally, I just like to leave it at the default gradient. And turning those background images off also turn off the sponsored images, which would otherwise be on by default. The Brave stats, I leave those on. That has to do with Brave's ad blocker, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Top sites here, this is going to be either favorite sites that you put in manually, so you can click on those and just basically add some bookmarks to your new tab page here, or you can have them automatically generated from your frequently visited sites, very similar to Firefox. Brave News, that is way too similar to Firefox Pocket to me, so I am not going to turn that on. There's a clock here on the dashboard by default. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. Most computers already have a clock on them, so having that on your new tab page isn't necessarily super useful. And finally here we've got cards. I like to turn all of the cards off. We can do that by scrolling to the bottom and just turning that option off. Of course, if you want to use some cards and not others, you can hide them individually as well. If we X out of the Customize Dashboard dialog, we still have a thing here that says scroll for Brave News. If we scroll down here, you can click on No Thanks to get rid of that. So now we have a very clean and nice new tab page. Some of the other things I like to do by default, I don't use Brave Rewards. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I do like to right-click on that and just hide that icon. I also do not use Brave's wallet. This is a cryptocurrency wallet that you can use if you're into crypto. I'm going to right-click on that and hide that as well. Even if I did use cryptocurrency, which I don't very much, I wouldn't really want it in my web browser just for security reasons. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-B just to get rid of the bookmarks toolbar. Just like in Firefox, the first press there enabled it for all tabs, and then the second press disables it for both the new tab page and all other tabs. And finally, there are a few more preferences I want to tweak here. I'm going to go down to this gear icon in the bottom right of the new tab page and click on that. It's going to open up our Brave settings. Down here under Appearance, there are a number I like to change. We're going to switch this over to the dark theme. If you're on Linux, you can also use a theme derived from your GTK theme. That works pretty well, but I also like Brave's branded dark theme here. The Show Brave News and Address Bar button here, that doesn't do anything by default. That only affects certain web pages, but I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to turn the Use Wide Address Bar on, once again, to not have that wasted space on either side. And I'm going to turn on Always Show Full URLs. By default, the address bar shows a simplified URL. It doesn't include things like the protocol at the beginning if it's HTTPS. I like to see the entire web page that I'm on all the time, so I'm going to turn that on for more of a classic behavior. And that is just about it in terms of what I see as necessary adjustments. Things like Brave Rewards, I already turned that off. You can also turn the tip buttons off here. Brave is going to inject Brave Rewards tip buttons into certain websites, really only the ones listed here by default, but you can turn that off and then relaunch the browser to make that go into effect. And then the Web3 section down here, that's where your wallet is. Once again, I already turned that icon off, so there's nothing I really need to do there. So coming back over to the new tab page, we can go ahead and do the same thing I did in LibreWolf. We can go to nerdonthestreet.com to show you an example of a website. And by default, you can see once again the advertisement box in my sidebar is not working very well because the ad is blocked. Brave actually comes with a custom ad blocker built in, and they call it Brave Shields. So you can turn your shields down to allow advertisements on a website, as you can see there. And for most websites that you don't want to see ads on, you can bring your shields up. The Brave shields are written in Rust, and this is written into the browser. If you go and take a look at the source code, this is not implemented as an extension. That's kind of important because, like I said, Google toys with the idea of not allowing ad blockers in the Chromium source code from time to time. The Brave developers have come out and said, even if Google were to make a change like that and makes it so extensions can't modify the website appearance, breaking things like uBlock Origin for Chrome, since Brave Shields is implemented as part of their fork, this would continue to work regardless of what Google does, because Brave maintains it at a lower level in the browser engine. We can do similar tricks when it comes to hiding content. I can right click on a thumbnail here, I can go to Brave, block element if I want to make this image go away, and once again I can just drag this slider to the left until it's vague enough to cover all of these thumbnails. Then I can click create, and that's going to create a rule that blocks all of those. If I want to undo that, I can come up to my Brave Shields, go to Advanced Controls, and click on Filter Lists. That's going to open up the Brave Shield settings, and down here under my custom filters are going to be the ones that were added through that right click menu. I'll take that out and click Save Changes, and if we refresh, we're back to normal over here. The Brave Shield is also compatible with Easy List filters, that same standardized ad blocking syntax. So once again, if I go to twitter.com/knots_network, as you can see, Brave does have working light and dark mode detection by default. We do have a What's Happening box on our sidebar here by default, and I'm just going to come down here, copy my ad block rules, and I can paste them right in here to that custom filters section. If we come over here and refresh, now we no longer have that box there. So that's pretty much everything I showed you for LibreWolf just within a few minutes for Brave here. Once again, it's a web browser. You know what web browsers do. You know what you want to do on the internet. So you should pick out a program that lets you do it easily and with minimal distractions. Like I said, Brave is based on Chromium, and ideologically that may be a downside, but in practice it does mean that some websites are going to work a little bit better. And the other big thing that would make you choose Brave over something like LibreWolf would be the ecosystem around it, since Brave is a company and they've got some quote-unquote products of their own. I'm going to do a web search for Nerd on the Street over here. And by default, Brave is going to search in Brave Search. The first time you use it, we get a little box here asking if you want to help improve it by sending anonymous usage data. I'm going to click on No Thanks over there. And then we also get a notification down here about another metrics option that's turned on by default. You can turn that right off if you want to. Now, I've actually been using Brave Search for quite a while, since it was released. It's a relatively new search engine, and what makes Brave Search unique is that a lot of other search engines really just search other search engines. A famous example being when Microsoft Bing was caught copying Google's search engine years ago, but also things like DuckDuckGo. DuckDuckGo is a private search engine, but it really just pulls results from Bing, maybe reorders them a little bit, and then displays them to you. I mentioned StartPage earlier, which is a proxy website for Google, so when you search StartPage, it just goes out and searches Google without telling Google who you are, and then it turns around and returns the results to you. What Brave is doing with Brave Search is they've actually got their own web crawlers and their own database, so they are really building the search engine from the ground up. They're trying to compete with Google not just by reordering Google's search results, but by actually presenting an alternative source for the information, which is an absolutely huge undertaking, and I was not expecting it to work very well. I have found that Brave Search works pretty well for a lot of searches. Now, as you can see here, searching for Nerd on the Street, some of the results were not quite as relevant. We've got Nerd Street here at the top, which I think is a financial website, or just esports, I guess, judging by that tagline there. And we also get their Twitter page instead of mine showing up. However, we do get some of my Nerd on the Street videos here, so they got those right. Scrolling down here, we've still got a lot more Nerd Street stuff, so I think they went a little too far with discarding articles and short words like the on and the in my search query. But if we go down towards the bottom of the page, we do have nerdonthestreet.com here, and then they start getting more actual relevant results towards the bottom of the page, but hey, at least I'm on page 1. I have found myself using Brave Search on my phone. I've got it set as default on Brave there, and I've also found myself using it even in other web browsers like Firefox on my work machine sometimes. And search engines and their algorithms are a little weird. You really just have to experiment and see for yourself what types of searches are going to work best in different search engines. You know, for things like error messages. I do a lot of computer stuff, so sometimes I need to do web searches for error messages. Personally, I found that sometimes error messages don't get as many results on Brave as they do on other search engines, or as many relevant results. Once again, largely because Brave is building this database from the ground up. They might not have all of GitHub and GitLab and all of developers' independent websites indexed yet. And like I said, I adopted Brave Search pretty early on, so that might have changed since I had those experiences. But when I search Brave Search and I don't get good results, I just pop over to DuckDuckGo. Or likewise, when I'm using LibreWolf, if DuckDuckGo doesn't give me any good results, I can pop over to Brave Search. It's just good to have another option. And it's actually really easy to switch back and forth when you need to. You don't even need to go to a different website. Here in the Brave Search box, if we type in an exclamation point and then DDG, or you can also just type D, but I like the full acronym, DDG for DuckDuckGo. If you type that into your search, then it will actually redirect you over to the same search on DuckDuckGo. And over there, they've actually implemented the same thing in reverse. If you type in exclamation point Brave and hit enter on DuckDuckGo, it sends you over to Brave Search. So these more privacy-focused search engines might not have as good of results all the time, but they are working together to enable you to find what you're looking for. Aside from normal search results, we also have image and video search, and until very recently, Brave was actually sending people over to Bing Images and Google Images for image search, and the same thing for videos. When you clicked on one of these items in the menu, it would actually give you a pop-up allowing you to select which external website you want to go to, rather than just reskinning external results, which might give the impression that they're independent. I assume the delay was because it takes a lot more processing power and storage and just time and effort to build image and video databases compared to just text web databases. But they did get their own image and video search online very recently. It was August 3rd, 2023, when they rolled out their own image and video search. They've got a blog post on their website talking about that. I do think that's pretty important because a lot of times if you don't know what something is, the quickest way to find out is to do an image search. It's a lot faster to look at a picture than to have to read a bunch of words just to learn what a new object or item or name is. Of course, in this case, it doesn't seem to be working very well because none of these images are related to Nerd on the Street, which once again is just indicative of this being a relatively new search engine and Nerd on the Street being fairly small, even though Nerd on the Street has been around for over a decade. So there should be some images that Brave can index eventually. In between those items in the menu, we also have a news page, and then we have something called Brave Goggles. This is an interesting feature. It attempts to sort of make you aware of online bubbles and create your own to suit yourself, but also switch over to other ones sometimes to get different perspectives. So you can perform web searches and then change the ranking based on the type of profile that you would like to search with. Google would normally be building your profile, and they're going to just give you the profile and the search result rankings that are going to give you what they think you're going to click on towards the top. By default, Brave is not going to have any sort of profile, which is good for avoiding getting into that bubble. On the other hand, if you do a lot of specific searches and the default profile doesn't really suit what you're trying to do with your work very well, it might be kind of annoying to have to go through and dig for things every single time. So yeah, Goggles is kind of a feature that addresses that, and once again, it also lets you see, for instance, news sources on different sides of the political spectrum, so you can see what the other side is saying about a news story that you're reading about. If you click on Show More here, there are 8 goggles currently pre-populated by Brave. This is a really interesting one here, 1K short. Re-rank results to remove pages found on the top 1,000 most viewed websites. So if you sort of miss the older days of the internet where everything wasn't consolidated on 10 or 15 really popular websites, you can go here and turn this on and it'll just show you obscure websites, for whatever your search term is, of course. I have not personally used Goggles a whole lot myself. I tend to stick to the no profile option, but that is a feature that's in development, and that's the kind of thing that you see with Brave. You see these sort of almost radical features that they're developing that make you think, wow, if this works how they're saying it's going to work, it would be pretty cool and pretty useful. It might work out, it might not work out, and they might scrap it eventually. But like I said, if you're excited about using web browsers, if you want sort of those new features introduced from time to time, Brave is going to be an ecosystem that will give you that, while still respecting your privacy. If we go to brave.com here, we can see what their homepage looks like. As you can see, their huge headline here, the best privacy online, and right here in their tagline, ditch big tech. So they are not shy about that at all. Like I said, I want to temper that with you can choose not to use any of those new features if you don't want to. But for instance, one of the other things that most people have probably heard of if you've heard of Brave is Brave Rewards. I'm going to do a Control F here and search for rewards since it's not shown in the top bar there. All right, so down here towards the bottom of the page, underneath comparisons with other web browsers, we've got a link to some of their unique features that are slightly controversial depending on who you ask. They've got the built-in crypto wallet I already mentioned. They've got some security stuff. I'm going to show you one of those in a minute. And then we've got Brave Rewards here, and I just want to mention what this is really quickly. Brave Rewards allows you to optionally view ads within the Brave browser Chrome to earn cryptocurrency. And the cryptocurrency in Brave, it's BAT, Basic Attention Token. You can then use that cryptocurrency to tip creators if you want to. You can either send tips to websites manually, or you can have Brave browser set up to actually automatically distribute your tips between all the different websites that you went to based on how much time you spent on each one. So if you spent 30% of your time on the web on one particular website, 30% of your monthly tip allocation that you set up will automatically go to that website. Now, just for the sake of transparency, I do want to say I have the Nerd on the Street website and all of the Nerd on the Street YouTube channels added to a Brave Creators account, which means that Brave users can send tips to the website, to me, via the Brave Rewards system. And I can also get those automated tips from the users who have that set up. Now, with that said, the average amount that I make from that, I actually have made a little bit of money from it, but it typically works out to about $1 or $2 per month. So it's not paying any bills or anything like that. I did want to mention I have it set up since I was talking about this. But when Brave was first launched, they actually announced a feature where they were going to inject their own ads into websites that enabled it. And one of the reasons I initially went and signed up for Brave Creators was to disable that feature for nerdonthestreet.com. For the people who have not been following Brave but have just heard of that headline earlier on when it was first created, that feature is no longer in existence. Brave does not inject ads into websites. As you can see here, there's a list of ad formats in Brave. Basically, you're looking at ads in your search for that search engine. You can have ads on the new tab page, ads in Brave News if you have that enabled at all, and you can also get push notifications if you're using Brave on your mobile device. So for an example of a new tab page here, you can see there's just a little ad stuck at the bottom left, and it looks like this image has been replaced for one for a car ad. So it's a really easy way you can make, $1 per month or something, depending on how much these advertisers are paying, and you can either withdraw that using a crypto exchange system and get real money for viewing their ads, or you can turn around and tip that to creators using the Brave Rewards program. So the rewards icon that I almost immediately disabled, that is a thing that exists in Brave. And if it sounds cool, if you like the idea of making websites no longer depend on third-party ads such as Google, but still helping them exist by sending tips to them, then you can go and turn that on. I actually know some people personally who have that feature enabled and who deposit a few bucks a month in it for tipping. That's the kind of feature that I think it would be really awesome if everybody used it. At such a low volume volume of users actually choosing to use it, it's not upsetting big tech anytime soon. But like a lot of the Brave ecosystem, once again, it's a cool idea. Now, I mentioned before that you can get push notifications on your mobile device, and that is because Brave also has options for iOS and Android in addition to the desktop stuff. LibreWolf is only available for desktop as of right now. LibreWolf is based on Firefox, and if you turn on Firefox Sync in LibreWolf, you can sync your bookmarks and tabs with Firefox on mobile. So there is an ecosystem story there, but LibreWolf themselves are only really managing the desktop. Brave does have an option, like I said, for mobile, and it is nice because they have the Brave Shields on mobile. By default, you get an ad blocker on your mobile phone, which is even more useful on a mobile device than it is on desktops. Ads are annoying on desktops, but if I come here to the new tab page, I really like this statistics block. It shows how many trackers and ads have been blocked so far, how much bandwidth you've saved by blocking those, and then it also estimates, based on your internet speed, how much time you've saved by not downloading those ads and trackers and things. These things are sort of estimates. Brave put out a blog post a while ago about how they estimate these, since you obviously can't know for sure how big a file would have been without downloading it. But it is cool to see this add up. On my main computer, this has gotten up to over a day, over 24 hours that I've quote-unquote saved by using the ad blocker that's built into Brave. Now, on your mobile device, this doesn't just save you time, it also saves you bandwidth, which is more important on mobile because data connections are typically limited. So if you're browsing out and about without a Wi-Fi connection, let's say you only have a gigabyte per month of either data total or fast data on your mobile carrier plan. This can help you stretch that farther when you're browsing, once again, by blocking all those ads. A lot of ads on the internet are pictures and things that take up a lot of bandwidth, relatively speaking, compared to text. So having the shield on mobile is helpful. And if you go and grab Firefox for mobile, it's not going to have uBlock Origin built in. The plugin ecosystem for mobile devices is not the same as it is on desktops. There are ways that you can get third-party ad blocking plugins working on mobile. Brave is providing a big convenience by having that built right in by default. On iOS, that is going to be using the Safari WebKit engine because that's what Apple mandates, but the ad blocker is still there, and then on Android, of course, it's going to be using the Chromium engine underneath. Complementing that mobile version, we also do have Sync here in Brave. If you go to the menu, you can click on Sync. It'll open up the Sync setup page. The Sync feature built into Brave is an interesting implementation. It's actually the same protocol that Chromium uses. It stores your data on Brave-administered servers, not Google-owned servers. Brave uses Amazon Web Services, AWS, for their hosting in general. And the Sync here actually doesn't create an account of any sort. It basically generates a very secure password and displays it as a QR code, or as an alternative to using a QR code, it also turns it into one of those 24, 25 word passphrases, similar to a crypto wallet, which is very on brand for Brave. And then you go and scan the QR code with another device or enter that passphrase into another device, and then it authenticates with the Brave servers so that sync can work. Now, Google Chrome and Chromium allow syncing, and they do have a client-side encryption option that is optional. If you want to, when you're using Google Chrome or Chromium, when you're syncing with the Google servers, so that things like your browser history and your open tabs can be accessed between different devices, you can choose to go and enable an extra setting in Chromium, and you can enter in a separate password that is just used to encrypt all of that stuff, so that theoretically Google will not have access to any of it, even if you're using Google Chrome. Brave has that on by default. It's the same type of encryption that Google offers optionally, but Brave has it enabled for everybody, and it's going to use that super secure password / passphrase / QR code, so that once again, Brave won't be able to see anything that you're syncing. If you used Brave Sync a while ago, you might want to give it another try. I know the first generation of Brave Sync that I personally tried out back when it was new, it was more of a peer-to-peer solution, and it was not the most reliable thing. The current iteration of Brave Sync, which is V2, they specifically rebased it to use a lot of the features and technologies built into Google Chromium intentionally so that the syncing is more reliable. So there's that. And one other little cool feature I want to show you about Brave. Right here on brave.com, you can see we've got a strange button in the address bar that says Tor. So this is really pretty neat. Most web browsers these days have a feature that is something like private windows. Google Chrome sort of invented this feature. They call it incognito windows. And when you open up a private or an incognito window in any other web browser, it's going to not save anything that you're doing to your local device. It's going to not save the pages you browse to in your browsing history. It's going to clear all of the cookies, which logs out of any websites that you logged into when you close your last tab from that private window or from all private windows. Now, as you can see in LibreWolf here, there's a message that the private window feature does not make you anonymous. The reason that is because there is a lot of infrastructure on the internet, and basically when you go to a website, you're going to have to get the traffic to your computer. Your internet service provider is going to see the traffic. If you're on a corporate network or a network with parental controls, whoever's administering your network can view the traffic. So if I go here to a website in LibreWolf, I'm going to go to ipchicken.com. There are a lot of websites out there that can tell you what your current IP address is. Now I'm going to block out most of this IP address just because I don't live alone right now and I don't want to screw over the other person who I'm using their internet connection by accidentally inviting a DDoS attack or something. But you can see part of my IP address here. And if I go and open a private window and I go to ipchicken.com, you can see that IP address is the same. By the way, that also does mean the website can see who you are based on that public IP address. So I'm going to close those. I'm going to come on over to Brave again, and I'm going to go to ipchicken.com. We're going to see the same IP address here, and I can go and I can open up a new private window, which is going to be like a Google Chrome incognito window. I can go to ipchicken.com. We've got the same IP. However, I also have another option in the menu here that is new private window with Tor. Brave has actually implemented an entire Tor client in their web browser. And this is a feature that is almost a little too heavy to where it makes me raise my eyebrow and say, do I really need all that in a web browser? But it's cool enough that I give it a pass because you can click on new private window with Tor. We're going to connect to the Tor network here. Took a second to start loading there. And normally when you connect to Tor, if you've never done this before manually, you normally would download the Tor web browser, which is actually a build of Firefox with the Tor plugin built in, and it connects you to the Tor network. If you're not familiar at all with Tor, it stands for the Onion Router, and it's basically a decentralized, distributed VPN network. Rather than sending your traffic through one company's server before it gets to your website, like with a normal VPN connection, Tor is going to send your traffic through multiple internal relays run by volunteers, and then finally to somebody who has volunteered to be a Tor exit node. Then it will go from them to the website and then back into the exit node and through the entire network. Back to you. Now, simply connecting to Tor does not make you a relay on the network, and the whole point of the multi-hop design is that no one party knows both the source and the destination of the traffic. So just connecting to Tor by default theoretically should not pose any legal or safety risk. But now that we're connected to Tor, I can go to ipchicken.com. And it's going to load just a little bit slower, but you can see the IP address is now different. So ipchicken saw that data come from a Tor exit node, and my ISP, for me it happens to be Comcast Xfinity right now, they're not able to see that I just went to this website. They saw all the other times I just went to it, but they couldn't see me go to it this time, and they won't see anything that I'm doing in any of these Tor tabs. So this is a really interesting feature to me because a lot of different companies and web browsers out there are making their own VPNs. They're trying to sell you their own VPNs. We see this with Mozilla Firefox. Like I showed you earlier, if we go back to getfirefox.com, up here in the top right, well, now we've got a download Firefox button, but if we're already on Firefox or LibreWolf, we've got a Get Mozilla VPN button. And if you're using Mozilla's VPN, there is still a party who can see all of the traffic that you're sending and receiving, and that's Mozilla. You're paying them to care about your privacy, but that is a paid service. And I find it really interesting. You know, I would see a VPN service as being something that Brave would have no trouble adding to their anti-big tech agenda here. I'm kind of surprised that Brave is not offering a paid VPN service, but instead they are offering something better and more private and free. They have basically bundled a free and open source VPN into their browser here. That's sort of how you can think about that feature. So if you don't want to use it, if you don't do anything on the internet that you feel like you need to hide from your ISP, you never need to open that option. You know, I don't think I've ever actually used that option personally on my own computers when I'm using Brave. I've never clicked on that button intentionally until this video when I was demoing it for you, but it is absolutely an option. And once again, it's kind of the more exciting part of web browsers. That's a new and exciting feature. No other web browser that I know of is doing that. So instead of buying a VPN from Mozilla or Opera or whoever, Tor has its downsides, and you do want to be a good steward of the Tor network if you're going to use it. You don't want to abuse it because that just hurts everybody. And just like Brave, Tor has its sort of darker potential uses, and you may have heard about it in controversial areas of the news. But yeah, I wanted to demo that feature because it is something very unique to Brave right now. And that's just about everything there is to show you in Brave. Once again, it's a web browser. It loads web pages. Just like LibreWolf, we have an arrow up in the top right you can click on to see your open tabs. You can search through them, and we also have a list of our recently closed tabs that we can collapse there if we want to. But yeah, it really just does everything you would expect from a web browser. Here, if I click download, they're going to detect I'm on Linux and send me to their Linux download page. Brave also has first-class support for Debian, Ubuntu, and Linux Mint. They also have first-class support for Fedora, CentOS, Red Hat. Brave has an OpenSUSE package. LibreWolf does not even have a native OpenSUSE package, so that's cool that they have that here. And then Brave has an official Snap package. If you're on Ubuntu and you want to install it with auto updates, you can do it through Snap. You can see here it is official. It's maintained by Brave. They actually say it's not working as well as the Deb package yet, so they recommend using the regular one up here. They've got all the same stuff for their beta channel if you want to hop on that, or their nightly channel. Down here, they've got unofficial packages. It's nice that they have these on their homepage. They're not so corporate as to exclude those. On Arch, it's in the AUR. They've also got an unofficial Flatpak that's community maintained. So that is your universal package format option you can use to install on many different Linux distributions in a semi-sandboxed fashion. And Brave also has a Solus package that's maintained by one of the Solus package maintainers. So that's pretty cool. If I scroll up just a little bit here, they did have a link to their GitHub profile as well. They've got a whole GitHub organization here, and you can look through all their different projects. They've got the Brave core repository here, and that's going to include, among other things, the Chromium source code, since Brave is based on Chromium. And they've also got the Brave browser repository here. Once again, if you've looked at Google Chromium source code online, Google is using a sort of custom or at least antiquated interface. It's not quite as easy to submit bug reports, and it doesn't look quite as pretty when you're viewing the code. I think it's pretty neat that Brave actually puts themselves out here, not even on GitLab, but just GitHub. I really like GitLab. You know, GitLab's not owned by Microsoft, so LibreWolf being in GitLab, I can certainly get behind that. I understand why they're on it. But Brave over here is on GitHub, which has a lot more users. And you can see here, they've got 5,000 issues open right now. I certainly sympathize with them. You know, they've got 22,000 issues closed, so they are going through these. They do use this bug tracker. And if you have an issue with Brave browser, it's very, very easy to just go. If you've got a GitHub account, you can just create a new issue very quickly. Obviously, you want to read their issue templates and submit it properly. But anyone who has concerns about the company behind Brave or anything like that, you know, you can really be pretty assured because they are completely open source. They're not just publishing the source code, but they're operating in a very open source way. And you can actually watch the pull requests come in. You can see when they're merging them. You can see all the commits that are being made. And you can go and you can read the release notes right here on GitHub for every single platform that's supported. And those are going to show you notable bugs that have been fixed. And it's also going to show you what version of Chromium each release is based off of. The current version of Brave is based on Chromium 114.0.573.5.110. You can thank Google for that very long version number. And if we go over to the Chromium source, we can see the latest tag here is 116.0.5827.1. So Brave is a little bit more involved of a developed product, unlike LibreWolf that's going to be very quick to update, same day for Firefox updates. Brave is not always going to be on the latest released Chromium, 116 versus 114 if we go back here, but they are still generally pretty up to date. This is a release that was made in the last week. You can see they have nightly releases every single day. So yeah, that's just about everything there is to talk about in terms of Brave's source code, and that is just about everything there is to talk about in terms of these web browsers. This video took a lot of time and effort to plan. I know it seems like a really simple video, just showing you some web browsers, but you know, the reasons that you would look for alternative web browsers are kind of nuanced. Some of these features in both of these browsers are kind of niche, and you might or might not feel the need to check either of these out. I hope that I have alerted you to one or more web browsers you weren't previously aware of. LibreWolf is a much newer project than Brave is. I wanted to do a video about LibreWolf since I heard about it, just because it's such a community effort and I really, really like what they're doing. And they've really gotten better and better at the polish on their end when it comes to properly doing the rebrand without leaving broken features in place. Brave, on the other hand, has been covered by at least tech media for quite a while, and I do think there are some misconceptions out there when it comes to, what kind of user you have to be to enjoy Brave. On my main machine, I'm currently using both of these browsers. I've got them both open. I have more tabs open in each of them than I should probably have open at all, but these are my go-tos, both of these, so I think either of these are a solid option. You can check the links out in the description of this video for how to get either of them. Let me know down in the comments section if you enjoyed this, or if there are other web browsers that you use or you prefer over these, tell me why. I know there are web browsers out there like Vivaldi, which isn't quite open source, but it's sort of source available-ish and is very customizable to its credit. And then there's more oldies like Opera. You've got your platform-specific ones like GNOME Web or Falcon. But my intent with this video was to show you some browsers that are very much usable for mainstream regular old users. So next time your web browser annoys you, or next time you think, maybe I should try something else, check out one of these. They both have built-in ad blockers, and they are both very great for privacy. Another place you can discuss this stuff is the forums at nerdonthestreet.com. You can go here into the general chat or the tech talk, and once again, talk about your favorite web browsers there. I've been doing a lot of little quality of life tweaks and improvements to the nerdonthestreet.com website, the styling. I'm going to continue doing more, so definitely check out nerdonthestreet.com to see those updates, as well as more content that I'll post. But for now, I'm Jacob Kaufman, I'm the Nerd on the Street, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.